Today we're going to talk about how economic interest is driving the Sudan crisis. On social media, we encounter advertisements about hunger crisis and satellite images of bloodshed in the streets of Sudan, yet we rarely understand its underlying causes. Many people tend to overlook the crisis in which more than 2,000 people have died and 14 million have fled their homes. It is labeled as tragic but somehow expected, influenced by the long-standing portrayal of Africa as an inherently poor and underdeveloped continent. These stereotypical narratives create a sense of detachment, making Sudan's suffering seem distant and less urgent compared to crises elsewhere. This video seeks to examine what is happening in Sudan and why the UAE is accused of being complicit in one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. Its purpose is to enlighten how poverty can be systematic rather than accidental, and to argue that we have both an ethical responsibility to understand extreme poverty and to advocate for those who experience it. To understand Sudan's crisis, it is crucial to revisit the historical context. The conflict began as a struggle for democracy when Sudanese civilians overthrew the country's president in 2021. After more than 3 decades in power, as BBC explained, the coup was staged by 2 men at the center of the current conflict: General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of Sudanese armed forces, and his deputy RSF leader, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hamidti. Although both men initially collaborated, their competing vision for Sudan and struggle for wealth and political dominance ultimately ignited the conflict that continues today. However, Sudan's war is not the result of internal politics alone. It's not just a civil war. There are external factors also playing a role. Scholars argue that the UAE has been aligned with RSF long before the coup. According to Who is Fighting Sudan, the RSF's rise since 2013 was fueled by its cooperation with the European Union on border control, by its lucrative role fighting for Saudi Emirates coalition in Yemen. This drew the UAE's early interest in rapid support forces as a tool for regional influence. This illustrates that RSF's growing power was neither accidental nor solely shaped by Sudan's internal dynamic. It was actively cultivated through international partnership and geopolitical strategies. The UAE's alignment with the RSF illustrates how external actors can empower armed groups long before a conflict becomes visible to the world. Now, a key question therefore is, why is UAE helping fuel a civil war in Sudan? The answer lies in Sudan's natural resources. Sudan is one of the world's top producers of gold, and competition over this resource has been a major driver of violence and mass atrocities. As Gold and War in Sudan notes, in pursuit of their own interests, the gold states, notably UAE and Saudi Arabia, as well as other regional powers such as Egypt, have had a significant influence on Sudan's conflict. These regional states' long-term strategy interests in Sudan's are tied to economic gains. Sudan's gold, land, fuel, and agricultural resources are crucial to the long-term food security and investment goal of the Gulf states. The UAE full backing of the RSF therefore reflects its effort to safeguard these interests and expand its influence in the Red Sea and Horn of Africa. What appear on the surface as a domestic power struggle is also a story of global competition for resources. Recognizing these dynamics is essential because the pursuit of wealth at any cost is a major driver of global inequality. And it is not a coincidence that some of the most resource-rich regions in the world also experience extreme poverty, famine, and high child mortality rates. These conditions are sustained by powerful actors such as the United Arab Emirates, who support violent groups, extract resources with little accountability, and profit from instability. If we are serious about addressing poverty, we must examine not only those who suffered from it, but also those who benefit from it. The suffering of countries like Sudan is not accidental. It is built into a global system that rewards exploitation and shields powerful actors from responsibility and accountability. The consequences of this system are evident in Sudan's collapsing economy. Sudan's GDP has decreased by 47% since the start of the conflict. According to what are the economic and poverty implications, 15 million people are estimated to be now without access to healthcare, and around 3/4 of all health facilities are reported as being inoperative. The Federal Ministry of Health documented over 11,000 cases of acute watery diarrhea, with over 300 fatalities realities. These numbers reveal that the war is not only destroying Sudan's economy on a macro level, but it is also deepening poverty in people's everyday lives. When nearly half of a country's GDP disappears, essential state services also collapse, and the evidence makes it clear what that collapse looks like. Millions without healthcare, widespread disease outbreak, and an entire generation of children pushed out of schools. The shutdown of healthcare facilities forces families to shoulder the cost of care privately, if they can access care at all, driving households into deeper financial strain. Meanwhile, the closure of over 10,000 schools deprived children of the most accessible pathway out of poverty, locking them into long-term socioeconomic disadvantages. The conflict does not merely reduce economic output, it dismantles the social infrastructure that helps people survive and advance. As these systems fall apart, poverty becomes both more widespread and more entrenched, making recovery far from difficult even if hitting ends. These cumulative conditions make Sudan especially vulnerable not only to armed actors but also to the global system that routinely overlooks crises in politically marginalized regions. According to Sudan and Erosion of Global Health Ethics, the global health community remains largely silent. This silence exasperates the vulnerability of millions who lack access to life-saving services, particularly in conflict-affected regions where healthcare workers are targeted or unable to operate safely. This silence is not neutral. It actively reinforces Sudan's precarity. When international institutions fail to speak out or intervene, it signals that the collapse of healthcare, education, and infrastructure is permissible. As a result, Sudan becomes even more susceptible to exploitation, foreign interference, and prolonged humanitarian catastrophes. Global indifference does not simply reflect Sudan's vulnerability, it deepens it. Understanding these connections also show why addressing poverty is just the responsibility of Sudan or any single nation. It is a global obligation. Extreme poverty is often the result of international system that allows powerful countries and corporations to profit from instability, cheap labor, and resource extraction. If one side of the world is not living in extreme poverty, it often means that some of us are benefiting from resources taken from others. When wealthier nations purchase Sudanese gold even in cheap agricultural land or support actors who worsen conflict, they become part of the structure that creates and sustains poverty. Poverty is not an isolated tragedy happening elsewhere, but a consequence of global choices, global economy, and global political decisions. Because of this interdependence, spreading accurate information and raising awareness becomes a responsibility in itself, even for those who cannot donate. Shifting the conversation from charity to accountability requires all of us to examine how our countries and economies contribute to these crises and take responsibility for challenging the system that makes exploitation possible. Overall, Sudan's crisis is not merely the product of internal political conflict, but the result of a global system that continually devalues certain regions, exploits their resources, and ignore their suffering. By tracing the connections between the UAE's involvement, the competition for Sudan's gold and land, and the collapse of essential services, this video shows that extreme poverty is rarely accidental. It is produced, sustained, and deepened by structures of power that operates far beyond Sudan's borders. Sudan is not unique in this pattern. It is one of many places where external funding, geopolitical interests, and resource extraction fuel humanitarian disasters. Similar dynamics can be seen in Palestine, where international politics alliances sustain ongoing violence and displacement, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where global demands for mineral intensifies conflicts and entrenches poverty. These parallel cases reveal that extreme poverty often result from decisions made by powerful actors who benefit from instability. In each case, global political and economic systems determine whose lives are protected and whose suffering is normal. The war in Sudan has devastated healthcare, education, and economic instability, but the silence of the international community ensures that this devastation continues unchecked. Understanding the Sudan's crisis therefore requires us to rethink how we define responsibility. It cannot be understood as a matter of charity towards a distant country, but instead as a accountability within a system where wealth and poverty are deeply interconnected. If we are serious about confronting extreme poverty, we must challenge the political and economic arrangements that allow powerful states to profit from instability and human suffering. Because only by addressing these root causes and by refusing to accept indifference, exploitation, or the narrative that African suffering seems expected can we begin to imagine a future in which crises like Sudan's are neither inevitable nor ignored.